Good morning, good evening. It's been a long day. And welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club. You can take your seat, order a drink, and then we're going to get the panel going. My name is Phil Robertson. I'm the board member of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. I'm also a member of the program committee. And my day job, I'm the Deputy Asia Director for Human Rights Watch, so I'm interested in these issues of asylum seekers and refugee protection. And I'm very happy that we're able to organize this panel on a rainy night in Bangkok, and I want to thank you all for your time and dedication to come out for this event. You may be aware that in the Southeast Asia region, only Cambodia and the Philippines have ratified the UN Refugee Convention and associated protocol. This is a region where boats of Rohingya refugees from Rakhine State in Myanmar faced ping-pong pushbacks between Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand in 2015 in a crisis that caught the attention of the world, and ultimately saw a number of boats float away on the high seas with all those on board probably perishing. Here in Thailand, the government has dealt with influxes of asylum seekers and refugees for decades, dating back to the Hmong and lowland Lao fleeing the victory of the Pathet Lao in Laos in 1975, Cambodians fleeing the Khmer Rouge, and the Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia in 1979, and Vietnamese people fleeing their country, undertaking perilous trips and landing in Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and elsewhere in the region. And of course, Burmese fleeing successive military governments in Myanmar, dating really back from to the 1980s until present, where the 90,000 refugees who are currently in recognized refugee camps on the Thai-Burma border have now been joined with tens of thousands of more who have fled the SAC military junta since the military coup in February 2021. And more recently, a lot of attention has been paid to the so-called urban refugees, who may account for more than 10,000 persons in Bangkok and the surrounding areas, from places ranging from Syria to Yemen to Iraq to Pakistan to China. These people have all fled to Thailand and are living precariously without access to services or protection and subject to arrest at any time. But it was not until 2016 that the Thai government agreed to proceed with a mechanism called the National Screening Mechanism, or NSM for short, to establish a procedure to evaluate people's claims, and for those who are accepted, to provide them with a protected person status. And it was not until late 2022 that a regulation was promulgated to formally establish this NSM and its process, and that system formally came into effect on September 22nd, 2023. But very few people actually know much about it. And that's actually what we're here to talk about tonight. But unfortunately, we're here without representatives from the Thai government, despite a very strenuous effort by the Foreign Correspondents Club to get them here. And you know, these government officials, I think, perhaps have the most to gain by promoting this new scheme. But both the Immigration Division and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs were invited to send representatives, but did not. The Immigration Division actually claimed that they could not send anyone unless they had prior permission from the National Police Chief. Yes, that's right, the National Police Chief, the highest police officer in the kingdom, since he's the official chair of the screening committee that has been set up to handle the NSM. Needless to say, our entreaties to various levels of the police did not bring any response from the National Police Chief, and immigration is not here as a result. Nor is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, despite clear interests expressed earlier by officials from the MFA. Again, we just didn't receive a response to send someone. And the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, also declined to send a representative, indicating that it could not speak publicly about this topic at this time. So the NSM has been launched, but when push comes to shove, there's still apparently a great deal of apprehension and concern about the whole scheme, both in those who should be promoting it and implementing it, as well as, I think, those whose idea it was perhaps in the first place, including some of the international civil servants who have been advocating for Thailand to take this step for quite some time. But we are lucky that we do have two international experts with us tonight who can explain the ins and outs of the NSM as it exists so far, who can talk about some of the concerns and issues that exist from the perspective of refugee protection, and hopefully can help us understand what way this new system may be going, because it will have significant impact for the refugees, particularly the urban refugees who have fled to Thailand. So I'm going to introduce them both first, and then I'm going to ask Patrick to go first. Patrick Pongsathorn, right here, has been with Fortify Rights since 2019. Previously worked with the International Organization for Migration in Timor-Leste, with the UNHCR in Lebanon, and with the Kon Thai Foundation in Thailand. He holds a graduate diploma in law from the University of Law in the UK, and an MA in Human Rights and Humanitarian Action from SIPO in Paris, as well as a BA in Politics from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. And next to him is Prima Sukbanop, who is a legal officer at Asylum Access Thailand. She counsels and represents asylum seekers and refugees in the refugee status determination procedures before UNHCR Thailand. She's also involved in policy advocacy for implementation of the national screening mechanism under Thai laws. And she's graduated with a Bachelor of Laws, LLB, from Chulalongkorn University, and is licensed to practice law here in Thailand. So what we're going to do is we're going to have both of these panelists share some thoughts, and then we'll open the floor for questions. So I'm going to turn it right over to Patrick. Go right ahead, please.
Thanks very much, Phil, and thank you to the FCCT for organising this important discussion, and thank you all for coming out, especially when it's raining like this. So yeah, my name is Prayut Chan-o-cha. I work for Fortify Rights. We're a regional human rights organisation. We've been working on human rights issues in Southeast Asia for almost 10 years now, and one of our major focuses is on the situation of refugees here in Thailand. So just a little bit of context before we get into the details of the NSM. Despite being, as Phil mentioned, a major receiving country of refugees for decades, if not centuries, in fact, Thailand is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention and has no system of seeking asylum. Moreover, seeking asylum actually is largely illegal, criminalized, in fact, as illegal entry and stay under the 1979 Immigration Act, which, despite the invention of the NSM, remains the highest law in terms of migration management in Thailand. So into this void, in December 2019, the Cabinet announced the creation of a national screening mechanism. The idea behind this was to offer protective person status, not refugee status, but a new, uniquely Thai type of status, and limited rights to individuals who the NSM panel, which is selected by the government, deems to be fleeing persecution. First, let's take another step back. Why do asylum systems matter, and what should they do? So first and foremost, it's a mechanism which allows for the realization of a fundamental human right, the human right to seek asylum in another country. It's guaranteed by Article 14 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's guaranteed in many other human rights treaties, the Refugee Convention, ICCPR, others. Also, why does it matter practically? Well, at the moment, we're seeing the highest levels of displacement since the Second World War. UNHCR estimates that there are 110 million people forcibly displaced today. 36.4 of them are refugees, so people who have crossed international borders seeking asylum. 70% of those are hosted by neighbouring countries, and 76% of refugees are hosted by low and middle income countries like Thailand, like Bangladesh, and other countries in this region. And then why does it matter for Thailand? As I said, Thailand has been receiving refugees for decades, since the Cold War and before that. It currently hosts 90,000 Myanmar refugees in 9 refugee camps along the border and has hosted them since the 1980s. There are also 5,000 what have been termed urban refugees, so refugees coming from various countries, often for political or religious or other reasons for their persecution. There are also tens of thousands of post-coup Myanmar refugees, so human rights defenders, opposition politicians, journalists, who are refugees in places like Mae Sot, along the border, Chiang Mai, and elsewhere. Although the Thai government likes to reject their existence, they are very much there. And if you go to Mae Sot, you will notice a large Myanmar community. Also, as that suggests, there's widespread and systematic conflict and persecution going on in Myanmar, which has displaced 2 million people internally. And much of that conflict is actually located around the borders of the country, including in Karen and Karenni state, which border Thailand. We also have refugees fleeing persecution from the oppressive regimes in Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, North Korea, and China in Thailand. And finally, Thailand, because of its status as a major tourism and transportation hub, means that there is easy access to refugees coming from even further afield, like Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. So for these practical reasons, asylum systems everywhere are important, but also political reasons. If you look at the recent history of the European Union, for instance, migration is a very politically charged issue, and the way that governments manage or mismanage migration matters to voters, and so equally, I'm sure it would matter to Thai voters as well. And so it's a real shame, in fact, the Thai government haven't bothered to show up tonight, and it's a shame that UNHCR, the global refugee agency in charge of protection of refugees, also didn't bother to show up tonight. So ideally, what should an asylum system do? Well, there are a few really basic things that asylum systems should do. One is protection from forced return. Secondly is access to public services for refugees. And thirdly is fundamental rights and freedoms for refugees. So on those three things, how does the NSM perform in our analysis? Well, for the journalists in the room, the headline is not very well, but I'll take you through the details. In terms of protection from forced return, this is a really fundamental principle of international law, and it's known as the principle of non-refoulement, and it is a customary international law norm which applies to every single country in the world, regardless of their domestic legal setup. Thailand does not perform well in terms of abiding by this principle, unfortunately. And since the coup, we at Fortify Rights have documented several instances of forced return of Myanmar refugees, including incidences where thousands of people have been forced back over into bombs and shelling that's happening in Myanmar. We've also documented pushbacks at sea of Rohingya refugees fleeing genocide in Myanmar, and other people on very rickety boats in the sea. We've also seen, and Phil has been at the forefront of a lot of this work, documenting the forced return of individuals fleeing persecution from Vietnam, Cambodia, and China, and other countries. So on that front, so in terms of protection from this kind of behavior, will the NSM make any difference? There's evidence that we've seen so far in terms of the regulations that have been published suggests that it won't, because there are certain groups which will automatically, it seems, screened out of the national screening mechanism. In the notification that was published, I think it was back in February, which set out, the way that the NSM will actually work. It said that the refugees in the 9 refugee camps along the border will be automatically screened out. Migrant workers, of which there are about 3 million official migrant workers, will be screened out. They will not have access to this system. And then individuals considered to be threats to national security will also be screened out. They won't be given any information as to why they've been screened out, and they won't be allowed to appeal the decision of them being disallowed from protected person status. And we've seen a letter that was written by the Council of State to the Cabinet, which actually set out what will likely be considered groups that are national security threats. And they include the Rohingya, the Uyghur, North Koreans, and what they're calling war refugees from Myanmar. So some of the most vulnerable groups of refugees will be automatically screened out from this system, which really calls into question the integrity of this system and why it is coming into force. There are also other problematic elements of the NSM, including criminal record and political background checks. And so that sounds maybe like a neutral kind of normal thing that a government might want to check on in terms of refugees. But if we're talking about the biggest source country for Thailand for refugees, Myanmar, and we're looking at how the junta in Myanmar uses law against its opponents, criminalizing any forms of dissent, then the idea of a political record check or a criminal record check, really it does raise some red flags for us, and especially given the Thai government's position on what's happening in Myanmar. And as I mentioned at the start of my remarks, the Immigration Act continues to be the highest law in the land in terms of migration management. I think Prem is going to speak to that a bit further. There's also no automatic screening of refugees or individuals who are subject to deportation. So refugees have to know about the system, they have to be able to access the system, and they have to have help navigating it. And we don't know what capacity there is within the Thai government to help refugees in that respect. So the second aspect that I mentioned, the access to public services. Again, looking at the current situation, what have we got? So Fortify Rights just, I think last week, released some information about refugees trying to access healthcare in Mersot, but actually being targeted for arrest, detention, and extortion by police officers who know that these people are here in the eyes of the Thai government illegally, even though all of them are running for their lives. And even if they can access healthcare, they aren't able to effectively access the health insurance scheme, the national health insurance schemes that are available, for instance, to migrant workers. And so they have to pay out of pocket if they can access public healthcare. So that's the current situation in terms of healthcare, and I think that you'll probably find a similar situation in other forms of public services as well. The NSM does guarantee access to healthcare and education for people who have been granted protected person status, but I think we still need to see how that will be implemented in reality. I think we have to look at the details in terms of health insurance. I think we'll have to look at details in terms of any discrimination that the protected persons might face trying to access public services. And then finally, in terms of fundamental rights and freedoms, there's no mention in the NSM about a right to livelihood. So even if you have protected person status in Thailand, how are you supposed to maintain your existence here if you can't work and you can't raise money for yourself and for your family? Other rights such as freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, right to political opinion. I struggle to imagine that the Thai government, especially with the particular involvement of the security establishment in refugee policy, would ever allow even protected persons to exercise those rights. So I'm unfortunately a bit negative about that as well. In conclusion, our analysis suggests that the NSM does not meet international law and standards in terms of refugee protection. It's highly liable to political interference. It's not likely also to have the reach that many had hoped when we first heard about the NSM. And I think that the Thai government has actually come out and kind of basically acknowledged that this won't have much of a reach outside of Bangkok, for instance. And refugees throughout Thailand will therefore continue to live a precarious existence with very little protections and rights. So I'll just leave it there. I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Now we'll turn to Prima. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Patrick, for giving a very nice overview of the international legal system as well as the foundation for asylum systems. But I will be controversial here and start by saying that the NSM is not a national asylum system. It never was never intended to be, and it can never reach the point of being a national asylum system. And reasoning behind this and my statement, which might be a bit controversial here, lies behind the legal mechanisms that is currently available in Thailand. So, from my understanding, the National Screening Mechanism, or the NSM, is not a national asylum system, but it's simply only a challenge that an individual can make against a deportation order that has been issued against them. And they do that by arguing that they have been forcibly displaced and that they will face harm from persecution if they were to return to their country of origin. But all of this can only happen if they have been criminally charged with illegal entry or illegal stay under the currently existing immigration law and have successfully gone through the criminal process. So the NSM, it borrows a lot of concepts from international refugee law, but we cannot really say that it's exactly equivalent to, say, the UNHCR's refugee status determination process or the national asylum systems present in many countries that have been parties to the Refugee Convention. Although the methods of assessment of the NSM is quite similar to the UNHCR's RSD process, for example, the net definition of a protected person mirrors a lot the definition of refugee under the 1951 Convention, and the assessment process is through an interview, one-on-one interview with an evaluating officer, and the fear of persecution is assessed on 5 convention grounds. It's still important to recognize that the NSM is a separate and a very different process from the refugee status determination process which in Thailand is currently carried out by the UNHCR. So if we look very carefully into the terminologies and the process and the clauses under the NSM regulation, we can see that the NSM offers protection against refoulement, but it does not fully recognize the right to seek asylum. It is perhaps a notable development in the forced migration context, but I personally would not say that it's equivalent to an asylum law in Thailand. And the reasoning behind this, as Patrick has mentioned, is currently the only source of law that deals with the travel of non-Thai individuals into Thailand is the Immigration Act. And the Immigration Act still exists along the national screening mechanism. In fact, people who are interested in going through the national screening mechanism would first have to be prosecuted under the immigration law. This means that they would have to be charged with illegal entry and illegal stay. Perhaps that would be done through an arrest. So they might have to be arrested first and be charged with illegal entry or illegal stay, go through the court process, be penalized, which would be by paying a fine, and then they would have after they have paid the fine through relevant authorities, they would then be transferred to immigration authorities who would remain custody over that individual, and a deportation order will be issued against that person. This is when the NSM jumps in. The NSM is a challenge that person who already has a deportation order issued against them can challenge the system by saying that they should not be deported. Because if they were to be deported, they would face harm from persecution from that deportation, and Thailand would be breaching its non-refoulement obligations under international law by deporting that person. So it does not recognize that individuals can travel into Thailand, for example, in order to seek asylum, but it's only to prevent that very individual from being deported after the end of their criminal process. So this might respond to a really interesting point mentioned by Patrick in the beginning about how there are individuals who might be screened out from the system. For example, migrant workers or camp refugees. So the reasoning behind this is because the NSM only aims to screen urban refugees who are already charged with illegal entry or illegal stay. Migrant workers are subject to a different regulation and they already have a valid legal status to remain in Thailand. So they can never be criminalized with illegal entry or illegal stay to begin with, and that is why they're not eligible to go through the process. And same for camp refugees. They're specifically managed by the Ministry of Interior. They have their own process beyond from registration process all the way through resettlement process. So they are already subject to their own very specific system and therefore will not be eligible for this system. So it's quite a limited, I would say, mechanism, and it has its specific target audience, I would say. And I think the main issue right now is that's keeping a lot of people from applying to the NSM is the fact that the legal status remains below Immigration Act. That's why people are not prevented from arrest or detention or having a deportation order issued against them to begin with. So that's why I would say it's not exactly an asylum law. And because of that, it's also not really a durable solution for refugees in Thailand, because it does not provide any pathway to livelihood or legal status or access to other things besides healthcare and education, which are crucial for someone to have a dignified life in Thailand. Yeah. I'm not sure if you have anything you would like to respond to that.
I was going to, if that's, I mean, we can ask, we can open the floor for questions if you'd like. There is a microphone set up at the back. If you want to ask questions, please do so. We encourage you to identify yourself, your affiliation, if any, and make sure you indicate who you're directing the question to.
Hi there. Thank you for your presentations. I thought they were excellent. My name is Jacob Bogart. I'm with the Remedy Project. I have a couple of questions, so bear with me. I just want to understand the NSM a bit. One is on what the people who are screened out initially, who are not even eligible, as you were saying, for the camp refugees and the internal migrants. What happens to them essentially when we are talking about the application of deportation orders? If they are not included in this, is there any other legal pathway for them to stay in the country not included in that? The second question I had was about if the deportation order goes against an individual who is not being sent back to the country that they come from. As you said, it sounded like that was the one exception with that for non-refoulement to the country of origin. What happens if they're being returned to a neighboring country, for example, that is not their country of origin? Does that ever happen? And is that an exception to that rule? And those were the two questions I had to start with.
Can you just say that second one again?
Yeah, so for example, if we had a situation where there's an individual who's going to be returned, but not to their country of origin, if that makes sense. Okay. Because from what I understood, it was non-refoulement was being applied to the situation where they're returning to the country of origin, where they had a fear of persecution, if that makes sense.
Who wants to take that one?
Right, so I can clarify on the first question. So migrant workers who are screened out from the system, technically they're not screened out, but they're ineligible to apply. And what this means, it only applies to migrant workers who are registered in the system. So not all migrant workers in Thailand will be screened out, but migrant workers who have come into Thailand through the memorandum of understanding that Thailand has with Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Myanmar. If they have the migrant worker status under this MOU currently in Thailand, then they would be ineligible to apply. other migrant workers or migrant workers who did not come into Thailand through these channels would still be eligible. Right.
Yeah, and the problem with that is that sometimes your circumstances back home change, and you may need to avail yourself of international protection. And there's a concept in international law that says that you should be able to do that, the refugee surplus concept. But that's just being completely ignored by the Thai authorities. And it's putting people at real risk. I mean, there's, I think, about 1 million registered Myanmar migrant workers. And so they can be sent back very easily, especially if they lost their employment here in Thailand. They wouldn't have much recourse in terms of protection from reform. In terms of the kind of third country reform, I think the law of reform states that no country can send an individual to any country, regardless of whether it's their home country or another country, if there is reason to believe that they would face persecution, torture, other forms of ill treatment. So I think in that instance it would still apply.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I may add on to the last point a little bit about the deportation order. So a deportation order is basically an obligation that immigration officials have to deport people who enter or stay in Thailand illegally out of Thailand. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they would always be returned back to their country of origin. It could also mean that they could be resettled to another country. But this only depends on whether like this very specific individuals has been accepted in resettlement program somewhere else. And if so, then they would be, this deportation order would await for them to be sent to that third country. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they would have to return to the country of origin, if that makes sense. But in practice, resettlement is only an opportunity and not a right. So not a lot of people have that right to travel to the third country. That's why the major risk for most people would still be to be returned back to their country of origin.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Bhutanese. Hello. Hello. Okay. Hello. Okay. Bhutanese Kangkan from the Fort. Yes, I have questions regarding to this, as you both of you saying that actually the national screening mechanisms not like designed to be protect specific groups of people and seem not to be really the tools in order to support or protect the refugees. So I would like to hear your thought on like as you are working on the fields, would you see any like what would it be the like the mechanisms to be really protected refugees in Thailand? Do you think that SM is still the way, and to improve it in a better way so that they can be really protected? Or do you think of another new mechanisms? Or do you think like whether we should think about like to amend the Immigration Act? Or even in terms of also another question is that because as you know that Thailand hasn't ratified the Refugee Convention, would there be ratification to the Refugee Convention is the way to really protect refugees in Thailand based on the complexities of the way that Thai authorities define the refugees, or the obstacle thinking of them as the threat to national security and other things. So what do you think, like would there be any good solutions to handle of the refugees in Thailand? Thank you.
Thanks, PA. I'll go first on that one. I think in terms of an effective mechanism, we've suggested, and we wrote to the Prime Minister, you were involved in that. we wrote to the Prime Minister last December with suggestions as to what could be changed to make the NSM more effective. But I think Prima had made a really good point in that the Immigration Act, it actually is a big part of the problem as well, and I think we do need to see reform there, because that, as I said in my remark, criminalizes basically people seeking asylum in Thailand. There is, however, some legal mechanisms, including in the Immigration Act, that would allow the Prime Minister, for instance, to declare a group of people to have temporary protective status, and that's what we've been also talking with the National Human Rights Commission of Thailand about in terms of the post-coup Myanmar refugees. So that could be an option. But I think that you're right in saying that, in mentioning that, the 1951 convention. I think that really to give Thailand's domestic legal system a kind of backbone of, good practice and international law, ratifying the 1951 convention, 1967 protocol, is really the way forward.
Yes, and if I may add on to Patrick a little bit, so he mentioned that there might be a possible mechanism within the Immigration Act itself that could potentially reduce or at least alleviate the issue of criminalization of irregular migration in Thailand. And personally, I believe that would be Section 17 of the Immigration Act. So as he mentioned, under Section 17 of the Immigration Act, the Cabinet has the authority to permit any group of non-Thai individuals to enter or to remain in Thailand lawfully or to be exempted from complying with certain obligations under the Immigration Act on a special basis. So seeing this clause, a lot of organizations within the refugee rights sector have been advocating that the Cabinet should use their authority under this Section 17 to allow applicants to the national screening mechanism to be exempted from certain obligations, such as having to go through the criminal process in Thailand as they apply to the NSM, or perhaps at least be exempted from detention as they apply to NSM. And at the same time, they should use this authority to allow NSM applicants to remain lawfully in Thailand, so that they would not have to be criminalized in the first place. Now, if this section were to be used, I would say it could potentially increase the legal status of the NSM under the current hierarchy of laws, because it would no longer be just a challenge against a deportation order, but could possibly be a solution for someone who is forcibly displaced and is still currently in Thailand. But to add on to that, NSM is currently not the only solution or the only legal process for legal status that someone forcibly displaced could go through in Thailand. As the NSM is being implemented, the UNHCR's refugee status determination process is also currently being implemented. So these two systems will coexist at the same time in Thailand, and we believe that it would still continue to coexist. So even if the NSM does not provide protection to refugees as much as a recognized refugee status might for individuals who are interested in resettling to another country, for example, or even if the protected person status is not equivalent to recognized refugee status, then forcibly displaced individuals would still have the option to go through the RSD process. However, the only concern would be that the status granted by UNHCR to individuals in Thailand are currently not formally recognized under Thai immigration law. So if we were to sort of take a look at this very cynically, recognized refugees could still be subject to criminal charges under Immigration Act. So both systems have their pros and cons, and at the end of the day, because both systems are voluntary process, individuals would still have the autonomy to choose which one works best for them. Thank you.
Let me ask you, actually, use the moderator's privilege here. I mean, you mentioned that you sent a letter to the Prime Minister last December, and Prima mentioned that, there have been, for instance, advocacy by the various different refugee groups to the Thai government to adopt some changes. Are you getting any responses from the Thai government? I mean, the Thai government's not here today, but I mean, maybe they've responded to you by letter or somehow engaged with you in other ways.
No. They've ghosted us, just like they ghosted us tonight, really. I mean, it's really shameful. And I think UNHCR as well, I really, as a former UNHCR official, it's really sad that they're not here representing the rights of refugees. And just to, because we're both mainly agreeing with each other here, it's kind of ridiculous, but just to maybe just add a little bit of colour to what Prima was saying about the UNHCR's refugee status determination process, RSD. It's not recognised by the Thai government, so recognised refugees are still arrested and detained for indefinitely. And also the Thai government has prevented UNHCR from registering Myanmar refugees for a long time now. And Myanmar is the major source country of refugees in Thailand. So, you know, I feel like UNHCR really needs to step up. I think it really needs to grow a backbone and actually start to protect the rights of refugees in Thailand. I think it's really quite shameful the way that they have neglected their duties in that regard in Thailand.
Thank you, Phil. And thank you, Patrick, Prima, for the presentation. My name is Roque Raimundo. I'm part of the Asia team of Open Society Foundations. And I also started out as a refugee lawyer back here in the early 90s in Thailand, working with urban asylums who were called asylum seekers, who were then called irregular movers. I'm glad the nomenclature has changed over time. But it's an understatement to say that, you know, after 30 years of that work, the situation now has not really changed significantly. And it seems that the most significant change is the NSM, and it's disheartening to hear from you that in many ways it really falls far too short of the standards expected by international law. That said, this is what we have, and I have a couple of questions in terms of just understanding, and I realized that it was only started to be implemented in September, but do we have any knowledge about actual cases that have gone through the procedure that has been established? Have you assisted any individual cases that have gone through it? And in the process, what are your observations about how it is being implemented in terms of what's promised under the information provided so far about the process and what standards are being applied in actual practice? And the other question I have is, in the event that a person actually successfully manages to be able to avoid refoulement and be allowed under this NSM process, I'm not quite sure what happens in that case. Are they allowed to remain in Thailand? And if they are allowed to remain, under what conditions would they be remaining in Thailand? Thank you.
Sure. So in terms of actual cases, Asylum Access has not assisted any individual to navigate through the NSM process yet. Our service is still quite limited only to the UNHCR's RSD process. However, I have heard that they may have been cases where individuals have applied to the NSM on their own. I'm not sure of the specific facts. I'm not sure if any of you have more information on that.
Yeah. I'll just say that I've heard today that there may be as many as 30 or so cases that have applied. My understanding is that, in fact, a number of these cases are people who are were arrested at some point and then are out on bail, are potential asylum seekers, maybe in process somewhere, that, in fact, they have been encouraged by the people that were involved in helping them get bail to apply for this process, which raises the question whether, in fact, Thai immigration is trying to gin up some cases by applying pressure on refugees and asylum seekers to make them go into the process. I was told today, and I have not been able to confirm this, but I was told that so far the people who have applied primarily have been Syrians, Palestinians, Iraqis, and perhaps even some Chinese. but I don't have any details beyond that.
Yeah. We don't have any detail at Fortify Rights, unfortunately, as well. Hopefully, there will be more transparency going forward. Tonight's not a good sign, but hopefully going forward they will be more open and transparent with how this goes. I think, as Phil kind of alludes to, all of this is being foreshadowed by the Global Refugee Forum, which is happening in Geneva in December 13th, and the Thai government at the last Global Refugee Forum, I think it was in 2019, kind of made a promise around the NSM, and I think they need something to report back on, basically, so that it sounds like what they're doing is kind of rounding people up to try and go through this process currently. In terms of the rights that would be given to protected persons under the NSM, well, right to stay, yes, right to reside in Thailand, but only up until a durable solution can be found, so resettlement often, or else the situation of persecution resides in the country of origin. So the Thai government will actually be doing assessments of country of origin situations. So that will be another interesting thing to look at, and I think will probably be politically motivated, especially with regard to the situation in Myanmar. So yeah, their right to reside in Thailand will only be up until a durable solution is found, or else the situation of persecution is judged to have been lowered.
Yeah. And my understanding also in the regulation, which I read prior to this, that they indicate that there would be access to education and access to some sort of health care. Doesn't say how that access will be provided. It doesn't say who will pay for it or how that will take place. But there's nothing that is provided for in terms of access to work, no work authorization, which is a big problem that has been continually raised already amongst existing asylum seekers and refugees, that they don't have the right to work, even if they're recognized by the UNHCR as a refugee.
Yeah, and about right to stay, I think that's also quite a difficult field and to navigate, and maybe in the future there may be interesting observations we could make with regards to right of stay under NSM. So what the system currently looks like is that if someone were to successfully navigate all the way through the end and be granted a protected person status, they'll be granted an identity document. It's going to look like a passport, basically, and it's going to be valid for 5 years. Question is, what happens after those 5 years? Who makes decisions on whether that permit can be renewed, and how? And as Patrick has mentioned, the authorities would consider situations in countries of origin, but in which region? What if the applicants from a very specific community, would their needs and situations going on in their very area of origin that they're from, would that be taken into consideration rather than the general circumstances that is going on? Because certain groups and certain profiles, like, they face different kinds of risk as other general population would. So we are not sure quite how that would be assessed, and because the permit would expire after 5 years, would it potentially mean that they would no longer be protected after those 5 years? So that's something we should, I think, keep an eye on and see how it works in practice.
Hi, thank you for your present. My name is Nisha Pa. I am the National Human Rights Officer at Office of United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. I have only just one questions. So as currently it's for Thailand that they enact a new act on against the Prevention and Suppression of Torture and Enforced Disappearance Act, and one of the sections in the act itself, it basically is similar, it's kind of the same as a non-refoulement under the Conventions Against Torture, that they cannot refer people back to the country that they believe that they have substantial ground of the tortures. So I would wish to ask, what is the current development from the immigration police side to implement about this principle into their current practice? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, you're right. The anti-torture law that I think was passed last year
Yeah.
includes Article 13, which is a protection against reform or enforced return, which was quite a positive development in many regards. But the problem that we see with that is that there isn't any punishment associated with the contravention of Article 13 of the anti-torture law, as compared to the other elements of the anti-torture law, where there are specific penalties for officials who have been found to have tortured individuals. Article 13 doesn't have any punishment. So is it meaningful? I don't know. I think we need to wait and see how that will actually be adjudicated on, if an official is found to have forcibly returned someone to a situation of persecution or torture.
I guess one of the questions I had actually, I mean, in order to enact this national screening mechanism and actually proceed with its implementation, there's been a screening committee that's been set up. This screening committee is composed, it's chaired by the police, actually chaired by the police commissioner himself. It's administered and led by a vice chair, which is from the Ministry of Interior. Composes various different government officials, as well as I think several independent experts who will be appointed by the government. Is there any clarity so far on how that committee will actually function? How will it actually do its work and screening? On basis of what criteria will these determinations be made? I mean, is there anything that has come out that has indicated that we can expect a certain degree of performance? And I guess the second question is, I mean, a lot of asylum seekers and refugees are quite correctly afraid of the police. So is there any degree of trust in this procedure since it's being led by the police?
Right. So yeah, thank you for the question, Phil. So as Phil has mentioned, there is a committee, the NSM committee, or the official name is Protected Person Screening Committee. It's made up of Royal Thai Police, Immigration Police, as well as ministers from different state agencies. And there are some room for individuals from non-state agencies as well. However, this is the decision-making committee and not the individuals who will be in one-on-one interviews with the applicant. The person who will be sitting in the interview room is still the immigration official. So quite it's the same individual who may have arrested these individuals will be doing the screenings for whether they should be granted protection. So I think that's a very nerve-wracking environment for any applicant to be in. And we're not quite sure how familiar these immigration officials would be in terms of interviewing individuals who may have specific vulnerabilities, or individuals who have gone through a lot of things in their past, and they basically would have to share their entire life history and how they were persecuted, and with that very individual. So it's still a very challenging environment to be in for any applicant, not just for extremely sensitive individuals or people who are high profile or people who are considered like sensitive by the government.
Yeah, we've seen some SOPs, some standard operating procedures about how this is going to happen, but they're not particularly clear on, especially these kinds of really tough issues that all asylum systems have to, well, even though NSM isn't an asylum system, but all refugee processing kind of systems have to deal with, such as these really highly vulnerable populations who have experienced all kinds of traumatic incidences. There's going to be language barriers. There's going to be specific needs of individuals, whether they're from LGBTI plus community or ethnic minorities or from whatever. They will have specific needs, people with disabilities. But I don't know whether there's much of a realization of that fact within the NSM committee and the Thai authorities. And in terms of trust, I think this is going to be a massive issue. There just isn't trust between refugee communities and the Thai authorities. I've spoken to lots and lots of refugees here in Thailand, and for instance, the refugees I've spoken to in Mersot, they don't even they don't even leave their houses because they're so afraid. They're so afraid to be arrested. They're so afraid to be sent back. And almost to a person, they say if we're sent back, we'll be killed because of the activities that they've engaged in back home for the persecution that they've been facing from the junta. So, yeah, it's huge. And when you've got, for instance, with the Myanmar community, when you've got people coming over here who have been chased by military, by police, going to a police station or even a government office is really triggering. It's very traumatic, and it's something that they really won't do willingly. So that's going to be a major hurdle.
Okay, the mic is open. Any questions? If not, I have another question actually related to resources. Because my understanding was that the Thai government really hasn't provided many resources for this national screening mechanism yet. And that in fact there was indications that they don't really have a system in place, for instance, to have interpreters for all the various different languages that may be spoken by people who come before them, ranging from people from Pakistan to Yemen to China to other countries around the world. I mean, there's people from all over the world who have come to Bangkok to flee oppression. And so what are you hearing about in terms of the amount of resources and support that the Thai government is dedicating to this? And separate but connected to that, it's my understanding that, of course, this all came up at the beginning in 2016, during a time when the government was led by a military coup government by General Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. And so I guess the question is, how much of a buy-in does the new government that has now come out of the May election have in this system? I mean, what are you seeing or hearing in terms of any priority that's been placed on this by the Thai government?
Yeah, so resources, definitely a challenge, especially with interpretation. Because the process is taking place in Thailand and carried out by Thai immigration authorities, the language in the process would still be Thai. If there were any interpretation, it would have to be translated back into Thai. So it's definitely a challenge. And for example, if a Pakistani individual were to be interviewed in Urdu, how likely would it be that an Urdu interpreter also speaks Thai? Because to be fair, not a lot of people in Thailand in this context speaks Thai. So in practice, we may see a room where there are two different interpreters. So if we rely on that same example, might be Urdu to English and then English to Thai, which then gives more room for misunderstanding or miscommunication. But because we have not been observing these screenings yet in person, we're not quite sure how it will be taking place. But yeah, I think interpretation and language barriers would be the most difficult challenge currently in terms of resources.
Yeah, it's a massive undertaking. You've got 5,000, at least 5,000 urban refugees from many countries. So the translation issues will be very important to deal with as well, because people are going to be telling their life stories to these officials, and then their cases are going to be judged largely on those statements. So if there's mistranslation, that could end up in very serious consequences. And yeah, Phil, you're right. It was introduced it was talked about in 2016, finally introduced in 2019, and now we're 2023, and it's not clear what the resources are that have been dedicated to it. And from what I can see, it seems to be a bit of a scramble at the moment to try and get, to try and address issues like translation and other issues. I think what that speaks to, and actually what it says in the preamble to the NSM regulation that was published in 2019, is that the management of refugees, it doesn't use the term refugees, but the management of these individuals in Thailand is causing negative, or this mismanagement is causing negative international perceptions on Thailand. That's given as the kind of main reason why they're creating this system. And it kind of seems just like a bit of a PR exercise more than actually a serious attempt to manage this problem. So I think that's probably what we're looking at, and that's probably the reason why we haven't seen really a serious effort to back this up with resources. In terms of buy-in from the new government, I think we're still waiting to see. We would encourage them to take this issue very seriously. I think that they've had, since they've come into power, they've had some pretty big issues to deal with, and currently, obviously, the Minister of Foreign Affairs is dealing with the issue of Thai migrant workers in Israel, and some unfortunately being held hostage in Gaza as well, and other issues. It's a bit worrying that the Foreign Minister, I think, in his first few days in office, did say that what's happening in Myanmar is an internal affair. I mean, you can see from the number of refugees that are coming over to Thailand, from the from the shells and from the fighter jets entering into Myanmar's neighbouring countries, that this isn't an internal matter. This is a regional stability matter. This is a serious issue that Thailand needs to also take seriously.
Looking for questions? Do I have any questions from the audience, please? It's been a very technical discussion about a system that is supposed to be set up and running, but so far we don't even know whether they've actually processed any cases yet. Or how that procedure is going to proceed. So the question I guess I also have is, what has been the international community's reaction to this? I mean, perhaps we have some diplomats here, but the diplomats I've spoke to are all saying, well, geez, it's not a bad thing that they're trying this. But I mean, is it real? Is it serious? I mean, and if it is in fact something that they're packaging to take to the Global Refugee Forum, which is this very big confab, a global sort of event that's going to happen in Geneva, what are we going to actually see there in terms of reaction to this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess, through their donor dollars and money, they are supporting this through the UNHCR. UNHCR was on the subcommittee of the NSM, so they were actually involved in drafting the regulations and the SOPs and everything. UNHCR takes money from many of these embassies here in Thailand. So in a way, they are directly supporting it. I think I've had the similar kind of reaction that some are saying, yeah, well, this is an effort at least. But I think that from what we can see, from what we're actually seeing in terms of the legislation, the regulations, lack of resources, this really is just a front. It's a front for the continuation of a denial of rights for refugees in Thailand. It's a PR exercise. It's something that they will talk about in international forums, but it won't have much of an impact in terms of refugee rights. Interestingly, though, within the region, I've had some conversations, for instance, in Malaysia, where they've actually been taking note of this as well, and they're trying to kind of implement a similar system. We'll be monitoring that as well to see if it is up to scratch or not. But I think actually in the region, Thailand is kind of seen as a leader in refugee management.
Okay. A question here? Yep, please go ahead. Identify yourself and ask.
Hello, thank you, Phil and Patrick and Prima, for a very good presentation. And even I get many things from Phil that you asked my question already. So I see through the context of the announcement.
Can you introduce
yourself?
yourself?
Sorry. My name is Dom from LIRAP organization. Thank you. And from what I see through and listening from your presentation, it looks like we try to screening the person who come from other country around the world to Thailand as illegal migration. But when we see through, it look like we gonna fall into the same context that the people who already get arrested will be benefit from the bail because they just the first group to would like to apply for this measure to get bail. And from the announcement on 2019, it looks like they have the benefit for them, like you will have a special like status to live in Thailand or to stay temporary in Thailand. And then it's like you first or second, and then which means the second category and the first category and the second category will be proceed to the legal action. Is that correct? And the article number 10 for the 2023 is that the officer need to provide the practice manual. Do you have any have you seen any work on practice manual that they provide on this? Thank you. Oh, sorry. May I ask one more question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
If you were about to advise your friend as an asylum seeker in Thailand, what would you do to them, except those in detention center, like for those who still not get arrested? Thank you.
Okay, so I can start with the last question. Unfortunately, we're not able to offer any legal advice on this forum, but if any interested individual would like to learn more about the national screening mechanism or their options in Thailand in general, there are many NGOs who are able to give tailored legal advice to these individuals, because I guess each person's solution would really depend a lot on their own facts. So we can't really provide general advice to all asylum seekers in Thailand at this very forum. And to answer your first question about people who are already arrested and have bail. So I think this is an interesting question. So for people who have successfully navigated through the NSM, they'll be, according to the regulation, granted documentation, temporary right to stay in Thailand, access to education if they're children, and also access to healthcare. But according to the current interpretation, which is of course unofficial, it might be possible that people who have successfully been granted protected person status, they might have to separately enter into a bail agreement with the immigration detention center in order to live outside of Thailand, outside of the immigration detention center. So the current practice is this: if someone already has bail, has entered into a bail agreement with the immigration detention center, they have temporary right to stay in Thailand based on that bail agreement. If they're granted protected person status under the NSM, the regulation says they have right to stay in Thailand, but in practice it seems that they would also have to separately enter into this bail agreement. So it does seem somewhat counterproductive, and it's just worth questioning whether this right to stay, does it actually come from the NSM, or is it just because they have entered into a bail agreement and that the NSM does not truly provide any right to stay in Thailand? And because there has not been actual cases that have successfully gone through the process, we're not able to observe how it will play out in practice. But it's a big concern. But hearing from Phil earlier, we heard that most applicants who are already undergoing the process at the moment, most of them are people who already have bail. So that's one lucky thing, I think, because they have right to stay based on that bail agreement. And it may mean that even if they were rejected by the NSM process, they still have somewhat of a right to stay in Thailand based on that bail agreement. But then the bail agreement is temporary, so we're not sure if it could be revoked at any given time. Yeah.
What about the issue of, there is supposedly in the regulations supposed to be some sort of manual that will inform officials about what they're supposed to do. Has there been any sign of this manual yet?
No, unless it's the SOPs that we've seen, but I think it's something, it sounds like it's something separate, but it would be very interesting to see that. And I think that, you know, it's going to be interesting as well to see whether this system gets translated outside of Bangkok, and how will it be applied in places like Mae Sot, Chiang Mai, Chiang Rai, elsewhere, and what kind of process of capacity building and kind of, you know, education will be provided to Thai officials who will be expected to implement this system out in the provinces.
Yeah, I mean that's a very relevant point, because there's a pretty significant drop off in terms of capacity and education and training given to local officials once you get outside of Bangkok. And so, you know, the question would be like whether officials have even heard about this in places like Chiang Rai or something like that. I mean, one of the things I guess I would ask to you all is, and this has been pointed out by various different observers, including observers in the diplomatic community, is that doesn't seem to be there's a lot of incentives that have been created for a refugee or asylum seeker to go into this process. That, you know, they're still not escaping the need for bail. There's a potential, if they're not in the IDC, that they might have to go to the IDC as part of the NSM process, because they would still be under the law that declares them being illegally in Thailand. There's no real clarity in terms of what will be given in terms of health care, whether they would have to pay for that or whether they would get it for free. There's no clarity in terms of education for children, in terms of whether local schools will accept to have their children educated. And it's not necessarily different from the education for all policy that already exists for children of migrants and refugees. So I guess, what's the incentive for someone to go into this process? Is there one? And if there isn't one, what should be put out there by the Thai government to make this more attractive for people to actually want to apply?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. And I think that what Prima said about, you know, specific circumstances of individuals may make this system more attractive than others. But I think in general, in terms of its attractiveness to refugees, it isn't. There isn't many incentives. There are many of these questions that remain unanswered, and it's a shame that we can't put them to the Thai government.
Yeah, and I think long-term solution right now is to make the system more attractive, as you have said, is to again go back to Section 17 of the Immigration Act. If we could somehow try to find a way for NSM applicants to remain lawfully in Thailand while their application is being processed without having to go through the criminalization process and the criminal justice process, or be detained or have to enter into a bail agreement. I'm sure a lot more people would apply just to get a chance of having a government issued ID. I think that alone would help so much in terms of like raising the status above, like, instead of being just a challenge against deportation order, this would actually have some potential. This would actually protect people from being criminalized for entering into the country for humanitarian reasons to begin with. So short-term solution, I would definitely push for Section 17. But long-term solution, as we have mentioned, the NSM is not yet close to meeting international refugee law or standards set out under international law. So there's a lot to do more in order to ensure that this system meets those minimum standards. It might come in forms of amendment of Immigration Act, or perhaps a new law that actually protects refugees that's separate from this context of criminalization that's already existing in the current immigration law.
And I think just to add, it might sound quite geeky and technical, all of this, you know, all of this stuff about legal status, but what we found at Fortify Rights through our research, especially on the situation at the border, is that legal status in Thailand unlocks so many other rights. It unlocks the right to freedom of movement. You know, people feel free to be able to move around, go to the market, send their kids to school. It unlocks access to healthcare. It unlocks access to education. It unlocks the right to not be arbitrarily detained and not be extorted by the police, which is happening every single day in Mae Sot. So I think it sounds like a niche issue maybe, but actually it's a really key one for hundreds of thousands of people here in Thailand.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, actually, based on some of Human Rights Watch's research, is that we saw people could be detained by the police on the way to the market or something like that and lose the equivalent of 2, 3, 4 months worth of salary, which for migrant workers is not a lot to start with. So the idea of actually having the legal right to be in Thailand, to have a legal document that says you're a protected person, in addition to sort of access to education, access to health care, if structured correctly, it could mean a lot for asylum seekers and refugees. And it's very interesting that the first groups that we're seeing come into this process are people like Syrians, Iraqis, Palestinians, who many of them have been here for 8, 10, 12, 15 years with very little prospect of third country resettlement as a refugee to another country. So the situation in Thailand is probably the best they're going to get. So they may have an incentive if the system through Article 17 or other mechanisms is corrected, that they would want to do this. But again, it has to also have some degree of integrity in the process. And my understanding is that there's also provisions that allow, for instance, revocation of status if somebody determines that you're a national security risk or something like that. So there's a lot of very broad sort of language within the regulation that allows maximum discretion to Thai officials to, for instance, reverse themselves if they decide to. Okay. I'm going to ask for any last questions. Does anybody want to add anything more? Do you want to make some comments? You can certainly do that as well. We welcome that. I mean, I know that this is a very technical issue, and I do apologize that we don't have officials from the Thai government who, frankly, should have been here to answer some of these questions. If we can, in fact, find some officials with the political will to explain this, we may invite them and invite you all back for round 2 of what really is the NSM going to do for refugees and asylum seekers. But if there aren't any more questions, any more questions, any more comments? If not, I'm going to say thank you very much to our panelists who've demonstrated an amazing amount of expertise in some very arcane aspects of complicated Thai asylum and refugee law. They are going to stay around, probably have a beer or two to alleviate their frustrations. And you can come up and talk to them or ask them questions directly. And I want to, again, thank you all for coming to the FCCT tonight. And stay tuned. We have constant new events coming up on our website. We put them up regularly. We also have a Facebook page which you can follow. And many of our programs after the fact will be put on our YouTube channel, the FCCT YouTube channel, about a week from now. So if you want to follow this conversation again, look next week at the FCCT YouTube channel where you'll be able to see it all in its entirety. So again, thank you very much, and good night from the FCCT. Thanks, man. Thank you very much.